Hey y'all, I'm back with another Cdiggi Talks where I bring on a guest to talk about whatever it is I want to. Now, I brought back Jared because I enjoyed his political expertise so much that I wanted his insight on this political system that governs our everyday life. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. If y'all didn't watch the last episode when we talked about the election, thank God Biden won. Thank God. Can you please just reintroduce yourself?
So I'm a PhD candidate in political science at Duke University. I study a number of things. I study the concept of race, kind of how that structures our political or social kind of order, if you want to call it that. But I also look at what's also called neoliberalism. So that's kind of the ideological kind of structures of our social, you could say political or social order, because it's not just economic. So that's a number of kind of things that I kind of focus on, but we can talk about that.
Right. And a fair warning to you all, if you're a Republican, please look at another video because I really hope this video doesn't get like flagged or whatever, since we're going to be talking about everything. Like, I'm not sure if socialism, the word, is pinged or anything like that, but yeah. Anywho, now I named this episode the top 5 greatest American scams because a lot of the things and concepts that are just embedded into our society is kind of a scam when you think about it. And I brought you on, Jared, to help me out because our text messages like span from everything, and you enlighten me so much on these topics. So yeah, I want to get started on number 1, education. Education in this particular country, USA, basically like the notion of attaining a degree guarantees you work. Like I know I graduated from LSU and all I got was debt, just being honest. And basically like the privatization of schools and just being in so much debt after that. That's what I think it's a scam.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about the way the education system is kind of set up, or specifically higher education, but also like K through 12, it is kind of set up to, or it has this structure that leads us to believe that the point of school is to kind of set you up to get a good job. But one thing that I think is important to realize is that when we talk about systems or society, these things don't just happen. So there's always kind of a historical kind of origin or a story there that kind of that can kind of help us make sense of like, why is it that, people are graduating with tens and thousands of dollars in student debt? So with the university in particular, it's important to think about the role that the university plays in kind of our American society and kind of how we got to this point. And so, particularly with respect to the university, the origins of the university was, it originally started off as kind of this place where these enlightened thinkers, mainly white men, mainly, people with property, elite people, could kind of just have this space to talk about big ideas and to really debate kind of the world around them and whatnot. But eventually, it kind of became this place also where it was a space for people to really kind of debate and contest the things that they were seeing. And so, you can debate the terms of what is a democracy and what is a polity and all of these things that we just kind of take for granted now. But what ends up happening is that the university kind of over American history, and particularly after the Second World War. And so we don't really talk about this much in high school, but really the Second World War, when you think about like Hitler and that political situation, really what it was a fight between what was emerging, what was going to be the world system kind of post-fascism. And so what ends up happening is that you have what we call the Allied powers, who were like America, in the United Kingdom, and in France, who were kind of the emerging, the capitalist class, if you want to call it that. And you also had kind of the Soviet Union and in China to a lesser extent, which were kind of the communist societies. And so after Hitler was defeated and Germany fell, kind of the way that the world was situated was what was going to be the way that the world was going to move forward. We're going to move forward to more global capitalism kind of structure, or was it going to be more of a communist structure? And so that was the whole kind of thing of the Cold War. If you remember this in high school, that kind of was the impetus.
Y'all are going to learn today. I'm just saying.
What's also going on at this time is the civil rights movement. And that's really important because if you remember, Black people were not allowed to get a college education, particularly in the South. I mean, you had some places in northern states where Black men mainly, were able to be admitted into the university, but generally that wasn't the case. And so the civil rights movement, what ends up happening is that a number of Black people are trying to essentially make their way into the university. And so they're calling out the university in America for essentially being racist. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is that the federal government and federal leaders use essentially the university in the Cold War as a way to kind of essentially make some concessions. And so you start seeing kind of these symbolic wins, and but let's be clear, there's still a lot of racial violence and things, but essentially what ends up happening is that you have more and more Black people and people of color who are able to attend the university, and they start they are the ones who are really starting to question and push back against kind of capitalism and how ridiculous it is. All of this is kind of happening at the university. And this is kind of the ground zero for, you have Black people, you have women, increasingly Latinos. So you have all these groups of people who are essentially saying, hey, America is fucked up. We have a whole geographic region where people are getting mauled by the police. We have a system that is just in creating this inordinate amount of inequality. And how are we going to be on the world stage saying America is the greatest place on earth? And all of this is happening kind of, underneath, right here, in our backyard. So this really pisses off kind of what we call the ruling class. So the wealthiest of wealthy people, the politicians, and kind of that class of people, it really frustrates them. So they have to figure out a way. Well, what can we do to shut up all of these noisy kids and all these protesters and all these people who are calling us out on our bullshit? What can we do to essentially put our thumb on them and to stop them from really questioning this capitalist system? Mm-hmm. And so what ends up happening is that, and this was also spearheaded by your favorite president, Ronald Reagan, while he was governor of California, they wanted to make them have skin in the game. So they figured that if we essentially burden all these students and all of these people, this whole generation of folks with all of this mountainous debt, they won't have time to be out here protesting and critiquing because they'll have to get a job, they'll have to pay off these loans. Essentially, they will use debt, and it's called debt peonage. So essentially, it is a way to get people to comply with the system because they have no other choice.
Was that really the model?
Yes, by making school essentially an investment, the thought was that it would essentially make people become more invested in the capitalist system, not because they agreed with it ideologically, but because they wouldn't have a choice. And this also had to happen at the same time that kind of the social safety net was being dismantled. And so before, we had a much more what we call a social democratic system. So healthcare was much affordable, access to all types of public goods were cheaper. What the federal government does is they kind of systematically kind of pull themselves away from providing those things, again, to make people have to work more and have to be kind of more invested in the system. Because if you essentially have to pay, $20,000, $30,000 for a degree, and everything is expensive around you, and there is no social democratic system or no help from the government, you don't have time to be out in the streets protesting and things. You have to work. So the whole point was they were going to essentially coerce people into essentially buying into the capitalist system, not because they wanted to, because they had no other option.
Sounds like a scam to me. School should definitely be free, right? Education should be free.
So one thing that I think is really important, and I have advocated for this, is I think school should be free, not necessarily just because so I think we should kind of put aside the connection of school and a job. But if we just think about the unit, when in our lives do we have space to really be around people who are, and really just talk about things? How many times have you been in the dining hall or in a class and you can just kind of talk about the world? You can talk about things that seem crazy, kind of hear different perspectives, and just really kind of immerse yourself in kind of these different conversations. Like, this is a very kind of important phase in your life that you really don't have after you graduate because you have to work. And so the university really should be a space for people to deliberate and kind of talk about the world and how they want the world to look, and like forge coalitions and connections with people. And then by doing that, you can kind of create these movements and the things necessary to change the world. But by thinking about the university as only a place to go and get a job, you don't engage in that kind of critical thinking, because all you care about is getting a grade so you can get a degree so you can get the job. But if we can kind of detach that kind of connection and think about the university as a place to engage in the kind of discourse we need to actually question the world and say, hey, like, wow, these things are fucked up, like we should do something about it. I think if we could make that more accessible to people, I think we could make bigger changes. I mean, but again, there was a reason that they located the university as a place to disrupt, because they knew that this was one of the few kind of environments that was kind of conducive to that kind of thing. But yes, I do think universities should be free.
A concept that just sounds so simple that you just mentioned. You really should just run for president.
I don't know if people are ready for me yet. I might have to think about it.
I think you're more left than AOC. And number two, I would say the concept of owning a home. Now, the reason why I bring this up as a scam, because I just feel like, once I have my degree and my debt, okay, well, I'm in my 30s now. I need to be owning my own house. I have to, so I got to put money up for a house. And I just feel like there's just some type of, like, I should own a home in my 30s, like the shame of me just renting, So do you think there's scam qualities to that?
I wouldn't say a scam. I do think that, so it's important to realize that in a lot of ways, like, we live in a society that is very much, it's structured for homeowners. So I mean, in a lot of ways. And so interest rates, which are controlled by the Federal Reserve, which is kind of this board that just, these are people who just kind of sit around and say, oh, well, this is how much we're going to. So when you apply for a home, you have to pay an interest rate in the mortgage. Mm. These are things that are all controlled. And so interest rates have generally been pretty low for a really long time. So in a lot of ways, it's actually a good time to be a homeowner, because you look at the stock market, like, there are a number of indicators that show that, this is actually a good time to make, those types of investments. But it really just depends where you live. So, I mean, in New York, it might be a little bit more, it's kind of a toss up. It depends where you live, like how much money do you have to put into a down payment and all of these things.
On $1 million brownstone, I got to put up like what, 100K? Like,
probably about that.
Borrow from the bank.
The difference between owning a home and, like, student loans, although they try to frame it as both as being like an investment, I mean, you can, have an asset. So even if while you're paying into this, this home, it's yours. So people often use it as a way people will buy a home, and then once they're done paying it off, like, they will use that as a way to sometimes build, how people have like starter homes. So like they'll buy this and then use the money from that and then buy a bigger home. And so with renting, like, you don't have any like that. You are paying a landlord. So it's once that money is out of your hands and into their hands, that's kind of the end of the transaction. So in some ways, like, I would say home ownership is probably less of a scam than student loans. Home ownership is another way to get people to really invest themselves into this system. And so if you have a home, like if Black Lives Matter is protesting in your neighborhood, I mean, you're probably going to be a bit upset if they throw something to your window because it's your property. So home ownership is a way to make people have skin in the game. Like, stay off my property. I don't want Black people moving into my neighborhoods and dropping my property values and all of those things. So from that standpoint, I wouldn't say it's a scam, but in a lot of ways, I think it kind of puts a barrier up to social change.
Right. Okay. So not a complete scam. And
Yeah,
I'm noticing that like racism and capitalism, I feel like is ingrained in everything. It's just like, okay, running theme, y'all. So number 3, the workforce, like the quintessential 9 to 5. You got to work as hard as possible to get to where Beyonce is. You know, like you have to work as hard as possible. Sleep is for the weak. You know, you're not working hard enough. That's why you're not where you are. So yeah, that.
Yeah, I call it the rise and grind culture. I mean, because you see people on Twitter, they wake up and they're like, "I've been up since 5:30 grinding." I'm just like, okay. But so this is kind of what I call like the ideology. So capitalism only works if it's common sense. So the common sense understanding of the way that our society works is that we believe in meritocracy. So we believe that there is a correlation between how quote unquote hard you work and where you are in life. Now we know if you look underneath the hood, the gag is like our economy is structured to have a certain amount of inequality at any given moment. Yeah. Because competition is only competition if we know that there's going to be a winner and a loser. If there's no losers, then it's not a competition. Like, because everyone will win.
Everyone wins. We can't have a society where everyone wins.
I mean, we couldn't have a capitalist society where everyone wins, and that's the thing. And so,
okay.
We could. Like, the whole point is to kind of get people to engage in this deep amount of competition with one another. Because if you don't believe that your hard work is being paid off, quote unquote, then why would you work hard? So the whole point of capitalism is to grow the economy. The way we grow the economy is by getting people to believe that the more they produce, the more they work, the more they invest themselves in the system, the more they'll be paid off by it, which we know is not necessarily the case. We know there's a number of reasons why certain people do well and some people don't. One of the biggest reasons we know is that if you're born rich, you're likely to live rich and you're likely to die rich. If you're born poor, the odds of you, and so I think one way you could call bullshit in the system is that on this notion that hard work means that you'll, get where you want to be, is that if we look at all of the statistics, if you're born rich, the odds of you becoming poor are like non-existent. If you're born poor, the odds of you becoming rich are almost maybe slightly, but still pretty much not. So if we live in a true system where it was strictly meritocratic, it wouldn't matter how you were born into the system. Everyone would start with the same slate. Everyone would start with the same starting point, and it wouldn't. But we know that's not so. But we
Isn't that going into socialism though?
Maybe.
Because that's bad. We'll get into that later, but yeah.
No, I was just saying, like, if things were truly meritocratic, it wouldn't matter how you were born. It wouldn't matter if you were born rich or born poor. Like, everyone would have the same opportunity to move up the ladder, quote unquote. But we know that's not the case. We know that if you're born rich, that is the biggest indicator of whether or not you are gonna, live a life of success, quote unquote.
So we can comfortably say that ideology is kind of a scam.
It is a scam, but it's the way that it operates is because it is reinforced in pretty much everywhere we live. So you watch television, you watch the movie. Religion. Like, there's all of these areas where it's just reinforced that you just have to work hard and do your part and put in, and you will reap what you sow. But we know that is not necessarily the case. Right. But in a lot of ways, it makes sense why people believe it, because if you know that it doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to be fucked no matter what. Like, that is just, for a lot of people, there's a very kind of depressing way to kind of like perceive the world. And so it functions as a way to make people feel as though they have a chance.
Right.
The gag is like it's structured so you don't. So
well, moving on to that concept of not working hard enough, and if you do work hard enough, you may one day become a billionaire. Like, I remember us talking about the concept of billionaires, and I know you absolutely hate them. You think they should not exist. So that is number 4, the concept of the billionaire. Because I know some of our favorite celebrities are billionaires, and then we congratulate them like, oh, Puffy is this billionaire, or Jay-Z is this billionaire. This first Black Oprah is a billionaire. So why is being a billionaire bad?
yeah, I mean, so we've already kind of talked about it. Like the way that capitalism is structured is it's pretty much structured to be a zero-sum game. Again, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, but that's the way that it operates kind of as a economic system.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody is a billionaire, that is coming at the expense of many, 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 many people. Jeff Bezos is worth $160 billion, not because, so the craziest thing is I have tweeted about this and people will reply and be like, well, he works hard. I'm like, okay, let's think about this, just calculate it in our heads. If we want to believe that how hard you work is directly correlated with your wealth or your financial, where your financial standing, well, you're telling me Jeff Bezos makes like 500,000 times more, I'm making a number, but it's an exorbitant amount more than the average employee at Amazon. So you're telling me that Jeff Bezos works 500,000 times harder than does the average person working in Amazon in, say, the Amazon warehouse. And if so, I would like to see that. How does one work 500,000 times harder than somebody else? Like, I want to see it, but no one has been able to demonstrate how that's the case. And so if you can't do that, you then have to say, well, Jeff Bezos is able to do this because he is then exploiting somebody. That exploitation is through not paying people a livable wage. It's not providing them with the kind of the other services they need, whether that's healthcare or childcare or whatever, to actually to get by. And so he is making he is building this wealth essentially off the backs of all of these people who are being paid this kind of substandard wage. The biggest issue I have with billionaires is the amount of power that we have. And when people have that much power, we often feel the need to show deference to them to survive. And okay. I'm just always kind of like, well, we just took their money and just gave people to, and then the other thing people say is, well, he gives so much money to charity. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but if he didn't give that money to charity, we could just take that money and give it directly to the people. We wouldn't have to depend on rich people to do nice things, so people wouldn't be out in the streets homeless or starving. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
So my main takeaway is someone can't be a billionaire unless they screwed somebody over along the way. You think that pertains to every billionaire?
Absolutely. I mean, again, we go back to the, I mean, this is not necessary. I don't know Jeff Bezos. I'm sure he is nice to his children and to his mom and his grandma and everything else. But, well, I don't know about him because he seems kind of like a prick. But I'm sure many billionaires are nice to people and nice to their aunties and everything else. But I don't care about that. It is a moral question. It's not about like whether or not I think someone is nice. It is about the fact that when we have people who have that much wealth and that much power, it comes at the expense of tens of thousands of millions of other people. And so I think they are a suck on our society in a number of ways. And so I take issue with the idea of billionaires. I don't care about, I mean, Jay-Z's a billionaire. Okay.
I was going to say, just speaking of that, like, even like the idea of a black billionaire, like, I don't want you to get attacked, but like, even the idea of a black billionaire is just as bad.
Again, I think it's important to detach the person from the idea. Like, okay, I understand the symbolic idea of a black billionaire.
A lot of people latch onto that.
Yes, but we need to understand that doesn't change the idea of what a billionaire is. Like, Oprah is a billionaire. She is also hoarding her wealth. She is also probably doing it, has access to certain people. Oprah probably could call up somebody in Washington. If I had an issue, I couldn't call somebody up in Washington. So, I mean, that just goes to, I mean, that's kind of a flippant example, but the point being that they have access to power in ways that ordinary people like me and you don't. And access to that type of power only perpetuates inequality. So what we're trying to do is create a more just society. We know that having, again, I'm not making these things up. We have a whole kind of historical episode with the Gilded Age to kind of point to and say, like, we know having this many rich people is bad for society. It's bad for everybody that's not rich. So you don't have to make it up. We already know.
Well, hopefully you swayed some opinions in the room. Well, my last one, number 5, basically the idea that socialism is a bad thing. Because I always hear Republicans say that, oh, this person is a socialist. Don't trust them. Like, they're going to take all your money. Or, socialism is villainized. So you're saying that socialism isn't a bad thing.
So what I'm saying is that I'm gonna try to be a little bit more brief than my first answer, because I know I got down into the historical weeds a lot. But the notion that socialist is the socialist boogeyman, with the Red Scare, as they used to call it back in the, I'm sure you remember that from your history class.
Like, they always think of like that red thing.
Yeah, exactly. The flag from the USSR. I mean, and so that's been the boogeyman for like the last like half century. And so that's one of the things where it's kind of it's turned into one of those like common sense concepts. Like, we just associate socialism bad, communism bad. Like, we just can't talk about those things because they're un-American. And that's really a result of the Cold War. But I often say that it's not like you go to Walmart and just say, oh, this is the type of social world I want. Let me grab that and check out and just apply it. Like, that's not the way that these things work. And so any of these, we can tweak these things however we see fit. And so, like, there are some elements of a socialist in kind of political system that may not necessarily, I mean, we know that there have been situations where there has been some inclination to kind of authoritarian figures and things like that. So we need to be cognizant of that. But that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. And so you then have to ask yourself, like, what are the characteristics of socialism that we don't, that would maybe be fitting of this society or wouldn't? And so one thing that AOC classifies herself as, and Bernie Sanders and some of the others, is a democratic socialist. So the difference between like just socialism and like democratic socialism is democratic socialists argue that we should use all of the resources that the government has to make sure that people have at least the basic necessities, make sure that people have access to clean water, to housing, to food, to good paying job, to education, and all of those things. Yeah, healthcare and all of these things. So we don't have people living out in the street. They argue that why not actually tap into that and make sure that we can provide a standard of living for everyone. The issue is that, and the reason it becomes kind of an effective way to scare people is because, if you remember, as we were talking earlier, one of the things, the reason that capitalism operates is because most of it is driven not by policy, but by common sense understandings of the way the world works. So people hear socialism and they say, well, I worked hard for my dollar, for my house. Like, I don't want people to just get something while I worked hard, because they believe very deeply in kind of, it's a meritocracy. Like, if you work hard, you will reap what you sow. And it's reinforced in schools, it's reinforced at church, it's reinforced on television, in all of these ways. So it really becomes hard to have a conversation about it, because you're always just kind of hearing that, these things are bad, and this is things associated with socialism are bad, and the common sense understanding of the world, or it's not a coincidence that they're all ideologies or kind of understandings of the world that are very much conducive to building a stronger capitalist country. So I always say, well, rather than Democrats like sneering or dismissing it as like a slight, like, actually, like Kamala said, we should have that conversation. Like the means, like, yeah, I would like to have that conversation. We can actually talk about what socialism look like in America, but it's just hard to do that because we just don't have the historical knowledge to do that. So that's why we need free school.
Right. I think people should really like open up their minds to these concepts and ask questions, like, because I feel people just aren't informed. They just going by what they're told, and it's just ingrained in our head about this is the way the world works.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but we also have to look at the way that kind of going back to my first answer, like thinking about the way the world has been structured. Like it's structured so it is not by accident that we work longer hours. A number of like the lines between home and work are blurring as more and more people are working from home. We're always on the go. Like we don't have time to stop and really, and when we do have the time, we don't want to sit and read about socialism. We want to watch, our trash TV. So
yeah, real housewives.
Right, exactly. And so, like, but this is by design. It didn't just happen. Like the whole point is that if people are more invested in everything except kind of the politics of the world, like it won't change. So I don't think we should necessarily. I mean, in some regard, I do think we have to have a little bit more kind of hold ourselves a bit more accountable and really start to like question the things we take for granted. But also I sympathize with kind of people operating based on what they know because we only know what we know. So.
Right. Well, I guess we can end it there. I hope I changed the viewpoint of some people in the room. Some people. Like, please do not attack any of us on these ideas and concepts. But yes, where can they follow you if they have any other questions or if they just want to follow you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. It's JAYC Tiger Fan. So that's me on Twitter. I think my Instagram handle is the same if you want to follow me there, although I don't use it that much, so you might not find it that appealing, but I'm definitely on Twitter, pretty active. So.
Right. Yeah, you're on Twitter and Facebook. And when was your last discussion you had? Because I know sometimes you have your own lives.
Yes. So I'm on Facebook. I am planning to do my first. So I had been doing a live every week leading up to the election to kind of answer questions that people had about polls and in the campaign and all that stuff. So I'm going to have my first post-election live on Tuesday. So people want to join in and throw some questions. I'll be glad to answer them there. And I'll try to do it. And sometimes it's hard to not answer this in this academic way. I try not to be jargony, but I'll do my best. So.
You should start your own YouTube channel.
Hey, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
You're busy enough. Like you're writing a dissertation and shit too. Anywho, y'all, thank you for joining me. One day you come on here, we can talk about music at some point.
Yes, we have.
Maybe the Grammys. Yeah. Anywho, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, y'all like, comment, and subscribe on the video. You can follow me on CDIGGI1 on all platforms. And if you are interested in getting any of the shirts that I've worn in my videos, I have a link below. There's 30% off because it's Christmas. Get a t-shirt, support a nigga. Anywho, I will see y'all later. Bye.